بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, as for what follows, then this is our 12th lesson in our study of Al-Muqaddimah Al-Ajurrumiyyah, the primer in Arabic language, in grammar. And what's the name of the author? Ibn Dawood, Muhammad ibn Dawood As-Sinhaji. Naam Abu Abdullah. Naam, he's known as Ibn Ajurrum. What year did he die? 723. Barakallahu fikum. The last lesson we studied was lesson number 11. And that was وَأَمَّا الْوَاوُ فَتَكُونُ عَلَامَةً لِلرَّفْعِ فِي كَمْ مَوْضِعٍ. As for the waw, it's a sign of rafa', of the marfu' case, in how many places? How many types of words? How many? 4? It says it right there. فِي مَوْضِعَيْنِ. In 2 places. In 2 kinds of words. That's our last lesson. فِي جَمْعِ الْمُذَكِّرِ السَّالِمِ. In the regular plural for males. وَفِي الْأَسْمَاءِ الْخَمْسَةِ. And in the 5 nouns. And the 5 nouns are 5 specific nouns. What are they? Abuka, wa akhuka, wa fuka, wa hamuki, and wadhu malin, wadhu sharafin, wadhu ilmin, wadhu everything. Wadhu shay'in, as you said. So then, rewind a little bit. We're talking about alamatu ar-rafa', signs of something being marfu'a. And so far, how many have we taken? 2. The dhamma and the waw. The dhamma is for how many cases? 4. The waw is for how many words, how many occasions? 2 occasions. Then today we get into something new. We get into not the waw, but something else. Al-alifu. And al-alif is a very limited application, or it's only a sign of something being marfu' in one specific case. Look what the author says. وَأَمَّا الْأَلِفُ فَتَكُونُ عَلَامَةً لِلرَّفْعِ فِي تَثْنِيَةِ الْأَسْمَاءِ خَاصَّةً. Then as for the alif, it is a sign of rafa', it's a sign of being marfu' in تَثْنِيَةُ الْأَسْمَاء, dual plural nouns, only, specifically, خاصة, exclusively. So only one type of word. Asma, nouns, as it relates to singularity and plurality, being single or referring to one or more than one. In Arabic, of course, as you know, it's different than English. English, we only have singular and plural. In Arabic, we have 3 possibilities. Singular is called mufrad. So we have mufrad, muthanna, that's a dual plural. It's different than the plural for 3 or more, which is called jam'. So we have the jam'. Remember we did jam' is 2 types, jam'u salim, jam'u taksir, tayyib. Now we're going to muthanna. How many different types of muthanna is there? Is there a muthanna salim and a muthanna taksir? No. There's just muthanna. And muthanna as a concept is pretty straightforward. It's like jam'u salim in that you just add a suffix. Every time, male or female. So I have a Muslim, a single Muslim, Muslimun wahidun. What do I do when I want to say 2 Muslims? Muslimani. I take the singular, Muslim, and I add on alif noon. Muslimani. And that noon has a kasra on it, always. Muslimani. All right, what about if it's a muslimatun? What if it's a female Muslim? Muslimatani. We're doing the dual plural, not the jam'u mu'annath salim, not the plural of 3 or more, but just 2 lady Muslims. We're going to say muslimatani. So what about the man who fasts? What's he called? A sa'im. How can we say 2 of those? Sa'imani. What about a female who fasts? A female who fasts. Sa'imatun. Just one. How do we make it dual? صائمتان. Yeah? All right. One person who writes things. He's a katibun with a tanween. Katibun wahidun. What about two? Katibani. Katibani. What about a female who writes? A female who writes? Katiba or katibatun with a tanween. Now what if you want to make it two ladies who write? Katibatani. That's what tathniya is. That's what muthanna is. That's the dual plural. Whether it's male or female. It's just add ani. That makes it easier than the jama' salim, than the regular plural. Because remember, regular plural actually has a different way of doing it for males and females. Here, with tathniya, making a dual plural, it's just one way. It's gender neutral. Male or female, add alif nun with a kasra on the nun. And that makes it two things of whatever you're talking about. So a kitab, kitabani. A kurrasatun becomes kurrasatani. So then the definition of muthanna is what has an added alif nun at the end of it, wadalla ala ithnain, and that it indicates two of that thing. And the nun has a kasra. Now, there's one other option. It's not always ani. Kitabani. It's not always kitabani. It's not always muslimani. There's another way when you need to change it and make it not marfu'a. That comes later. Muslimaini, katibaini, and kitabaini. Yeah, so we say essentially, just for that little quick preview of what's coming, جاء المسلمانِ رأيت المسلمين مررت بالمسلمين. So we use muslimaini or anything with aini for nasb and jar. So, but now remember, we're not talking about that. We're talking about what's marfu'a and how do you know it's marfu'a. So the alif is the sign of marfu'a here. Remember, there's two letters being added. It's an alif and a noon. Don't get confused with the noon, because the noon is a sign of something being marfu'a, but not muthanna. In muthanna, the thing that changes when it's not marfu'a is not the noon. It's muslimani or muslimaini. In both cases, the noon is there. So the noon is not the sign of it being marfu'a. It's the alif. When the alif goes away, it's no longer marfu'a. Muslimaini, there's no alif. Get it? Muslimataini, there's no alif. So there's no sign of it being marfu'a. So it is not marfu'a. The noon is there in all occasions. So how could the noon be a sign of anything? It's always there. So now, that's all we're looking at is the muthanna today. Yeah, and the muthanna can be either male or female. Let's look at an example of a sentence for the male muthanna. I want you to write this down, inshallah. جاء رجلان. جاء رجلان. That's your marfu' sentence. جاء رجلان. Got that? جاء رجلان. Now I want you to write under that رأيت رجلين. رأيت رجلين. So you have جاء رجلان. Under it, رأيت رجلين. And then under that, مررت برجلين. 3 sentences all on top of each other. جاء رجلان. رأيت رجلين. And مررت برجلين. That's our formula for talking about sentences that have a marfu' and a mansub and a majroor noun. And so we're going to change the word rajul and make 3 more sentences. We're going to use the word bint. Bint is feminine. Bint is a girl now. So what do we say? Change rajul to bint. What's the first sentence going to be? Ja'at bintani. Ja'at, we're putting a ta, ta'neeth, sakina for the end of our past tense verb, which we talked about before as a sign of a verb, right? Ta ta'neeth sakina. Ja'at bintani. And then what do you think is under that? What's next? The next sentence? We had جاء رجلان رأيت رجلين مررت برجلين. Now جاءت بنتان. بنتين رأيت بنتين. Right under that. رأيت بنتين. رأيت بنتين. Make sure you put a kasra on every noon. رأيت بنتين. And then the third one should be what, Ibrahim? Nice, yeah. مررت ببنتين. مررت ببنتين. مررت ببنتين. Now all you have to do, you have 6 sentences there, right? Identify the words that are marfu'a. You should only have 2 of them. Where are the words that are marfu'a? In these 6 sentences.
The first 2 sentences.
Rajulani and bintani. Those are marfu'a. Yeah, the sign of raf is the alif. So how would we make i'rab of ja'a rajulani? Rajulani, nice. Marfu'a. Nice, just like that. Rajulani marfu'a. Wa alamatu raf'ihi al-alifu. If you wanted to say niyaba, niyabatan anil dhamma. Dhamma is the alama asliya. Don't worry about that though. What about the i'rab of bintani from ja'at bintani? What do you think, Sayyid Ikram? Can you do it? A'rib bintani. Yeah. Marfu'a. Nice. Alamatu raf'ihi al-alif. Nice. Ja'at bintani. The alif is the sign of it being marfu'a. Remember, the other 2 cases are not marfu'a, and that's why there's no alif. That's the whole point. That's the alif, the sign of it being marfu'a. Now you see the same word, bintani, in the mansub form and in the majroor form, and there is no alif. So it doesn't have its sign of being marfu'a. Rightly so. Just a brief note then about some words that already sound like they're muthanna, but they're not muthanna. Right? The word shaitan. The word shaitan. Is it muthanna? Is there a shaitan wahidun? Was shaitani? No, the alif noon here is called asliya. It's part of the word. Shaitan is a singular noun. So what about 2 shaitans? Shaitanani. Add another alif noun. You got alif noon. Because the word actually ends in alif noon, so add another alif noon. The alif noon in some words is not for tathniyah. Yeah, so it's not a shaytani. You don't say ra'aytu shaytani. It's shaitan, and then shaitan is munsarif. You say shaytanun wa shaytanan wa shaytanin. The noon is treated as a normal letter, not as one of these suffixes added onto a single noun. Clear? There's another word like jo'an, is hungry, a hungry person. Jo'an. Does it mean 2 hungry people or 1 hungry person? Jo'an. It means 1 singular hungry person. Just like shaitan is 1 individual, Jo'an is 1 hungry person. If you want to say 2 hungry people, Jo'anani. Jo'anani. Add another alif noon. That's a bit strange. You have other words that come like that. Ghadban, Atshan, angry, thirsty, these kinds of descriptions of conditions, usually. And names like Asfan, other things like that. And he comes as a common ending to a name. When that's original from the original letters of the noun, it's singular. It's not meant to be the sign of it being dual. Then you add on an alif noon to those words. One hadith that we'll end our class with today, a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, that is that the Prophet ﷺ said, Kalimatani, khafifatani, ala lisani. The word lisan, is it the plural of lis? The dual plural of lis? No, the lisan is a singular noun, the tongue. Kalimatani, there are 2 kalimas. Sometimes the word kalima refers to a whole sentence. In this case, it does. Kalimatani, like kalimat al-tawheed, the kalimat al-shahada, the kalima of your testimony. It's an entire sentence. It's not just a word, but we call it a kalima. Just like, can I have a word with you? Doesn't mean I'm going to say a singular word to you and just give you the word, Zaid. Have a word with you means a discussion, a topic to talk about. So kalimatani, there are two words. Khafifatani, not khafifa, kalima khafifa, that's one. Kalimatani, khafifatani, ala lisani. There are two kalimas. They are khafifa, it's khafifa. It's the opposite of thaqila, yeah? It's light, easy and light. Khafifa, it's easy and light. Light on the tongue. Very light and easy on the tongue. Thaqilatani fil mizani. Thaqilatani. They're two heavy words. Not thaqila. Thaqilatun. Kalimatun. Thaqilatun. Kalimatani. Thaqilatani. Thaqilatani. Fil mizani. The word mizan. Is it two mizas? No. Mizan is one scale. The plural of it is mawazin or mizanani. Yeah, mizanani. Habibatani lirrahmani. They are beloved. They are habibatani. Not habiba wahida, but habibatani lirrahmani. They are beloved to ar-Rahman. And of course, ar-Rahman is al-Ahad al-Samad, the singular deity. And he is not two. Ar-Rahman. And what are those two words? Subhanallah wa bihamdihi. That's the first kalima. Subhanallah al-Azim. That's the second kalima. The important thing for our study is that whole setup there, huh? Kalimatani, khafifatani, ala lisani, thaqilatani, fil mizani, habibatani, lirrahmani. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah al-Azim. It's the best hadith I know to bring to mind when you're thinking to study a tathniya, dual plurals. In Surah Taha, you can see a dual plural in a lot of structure about duality in the statement of Allah. قَالُوا إِنْ هَذَانِ لَسَاحِرَانِ يُرِيدَانِ أَنْ يُخْرِجَاكُم مِّنْ أَرْضِكُمْ بِسِحْرِهِمَا وَيُذْهِبَا بِطَرِيقَتِكُمُ الْمُثْلَى. Their statement about Musa and Harun, that these are two men. They're trying to use their magic to get you exiled out of your land and do away with your upright way of living. That's from Surah Taha, the 63rd verse. If you want to take a look at that verse that has lots of tethniya in it. It actually, with all of that language of a dual plural, it only has one noun that's a dual plural. With all of that language you just heard. It is la sahirani. They are two sahirs, two magicians. Sahirani. And with that, we'll end. This is an easy lesson for this evening. The alif is a sign of being marfu. In one single case, it's only in tathniyatul asma. So, to summarize and to end, Sheikh Abdul Samad, give me an example of a dual noun that has an alif as its sign of being marfu'. Anything in the world. Kitabani. We got kitabani. Ahsant. Kitabani. Two books. The sign of it being marfu' is the alif. Very good. And then Hanif, help us end by giving us an example of a verb that has an alif as its sign of being marfu'. One noun from Abdul Samad and a verb from you, and we'll be done. Any verb that you like, and just give it to me with alif as the sign of it being marfu'. La yujad. There is no such thing. Why? Bring me proof from the statement of Ibn Ajurrum. There's no verb at all that has an alif as its sign of being marfu'. Are you sure?
Yeah.
What's the proof from the Muqaddimah? Khassa. Okay, so the author says it is only a sign of marfu'a for dual pluraled nouns exclusively. That means, how many verbs can we think of that have alif as a sign of marfu'a? Zero. Absolutely zero. Because why? This is a specific sign of a noun being marfu'a. And not any noun, not a plural, not a singular, the muthanna only, the dual plural. So remember, I throw those trick questions in there to make you think, so you say, okay, I get it now. Huh? There's no such thing as an alif being a sign of marfu'. You really want to remember this and get this grounded, because you'll be tempted to say that later on when we get into verbs. When there's a verb like yajlisani, and you'll say, oh, yajlisani, that's plural, it's muthanna, it's the dual plural, yajlisani, the two of them are sitting, yajlisani, and then you want to say, that's a fi'l mudari' marfu', and it is. And you'll say, alamatu raf'ihi, because it's tathniya, you might fall into this and say it's the alif. But it's not yajlisani and then yajlisaini. That's not what it would be if it's not marfu'. What would it be? Yajlisa, lam yajlisa, yajlisani, and then lam yajlisa. We take the noon off. The noon would be the sign of it being marfu' when it's a verb and it's muthanna. Yeah, so when that comes up later, if you're grounded, if you're absolutely sure about what we studied today, that we're only talking about nouns, the only time an alif can be a sign of something being marfu' is when it's a noun, and no verb at all would ever have alif as its sign of being marfu'. So when you see yajlisani, you know that alif is not the sign of being marfu'. It must be the noon then. That will aid you when we talk about noon as a sign of being marfu', which is coming up next. It is coming up next. Allahumma barik. Insha'Allah ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. If your workbook has a resource 12.2 on page number 117, then I'd ask you to postpone that activity until you finish lesson 13. Again, study lesson 13 first and then do resource 12.2.